Q21. A Mule application is synchronizing customer data between two different database systems. What is the main benefit of using XA transaction over local transactions to synchronize these two database systems? A. Reduce latency. B. Increase throughput. C. Simplifies communication. D. Ensure consistency. The correct answer is D. Ensure consistency. Explanation why D is correct. An XA transaction, a two-phase commit transaction, coordinate atomic updates across multiple heterogeneous resources, such as two distinct database systems. It guarantees ACID compliance, atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability, across all participants, ensuring that either all database updates succeed together or all changes are completely rolled back if an error occurs on any single system. This guarantees data consistency between the two target databases. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. XA transactions require a two-phase commit protocol, prepare phase and commit phase, and distributed locking mechanisms, which actually increases latency compared to standard local transactions. B is incorrect. Due to the additional network round trips, coordination overhead, and resource locking involved in two-phase commits, XA transactions decrease overall system throughput rather than increasing it. C is incorrect. Implementing XA transactions increases architectural and operational complexity because it requires configuring transaction managers, XA drivers, and distributed resource coordination across systems. Q22. According to MuleSoft, what is a major distinguishing characteristic of an application network in relation to the integration of systems, data, and devices? A. It uses a well-organized monolithic approach with standards. B. It is built for change and self-service. C. It leverages well-accepted internet standards like HTTP and JSON. D. It uses CI/CD automation for real-time project delivery. The correct answer is B. It is built for change and self-service. Explanation why B is correct. MuleSoft defines an application network as a way to connect applications, data, and devices through reusable, composable APIs, API-led connectivity. Its defining characteristic is that it is built for change and self-service, allowing teams across the enterprise to discover, consume, and build upon existing assets via a Center for Enablement, C for E, model without waiting for central IT to deliver every integration end-to-end. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. Application networks directly oppose monolithic architectures. They promote decoupled, modular microservices and API-led building blocks. C is incorrect. While application networks use standards like HTTP and JSON, these are standard web/data protocols used across almost all modern integration styles and are not the primary distinguishing strategic characteristic of an application network. D is incorrect. Continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI/CD, is an operational engineering practice for automating deployment pipelines, not the core structural or architectural characteristic of an application network. Q23. A high-volume e-commerce retailer receives thousands of orders per hour and requires notification of its order management, warehouse, and billing system for subsequent processing within 15 minutes of order submission through its website. Which integration technology, when used for its typical and intended purpose, meets the retailer's requirements for this use case? A. Managed File Transfer MFD. B. Publish/Subscriber Messaging Bus, Pub/Sub. C. Enterprise Data Warehouse, EDW. D. Extract Transform Load, ETL. The correct answer is B. Publish/Subscriber Messaging Bus, Pub/Sub. Explanation why B is correct. A publish/subscribe pub/sub messaging bus, such as Anypoint MQ, Apache Kafka, or RabbitMQ, is specifically designed to handle high-volume, event-driven integrations with loose coupling. When an order is submitted on a website, a single event message is published to an order topic. Downstream systems, order management, warehouse, and billing, act as independent subscribers, receiving and processing notifications asynchronously well within the 15-minute SLA without bottlenecking the primary e-commerce transaction flow. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. Managed File Transfer, MFT, is optimized for batch-oriented, file-based data exchanges, e.g., scheduled hourly or daily bulk uploads, and is not intended for real-time or near-real-time event notifications across multiple downstream operational systems. C is incorrect. Enterprise Data Warehouses, EDW, are analytical repositories designed for complex historical reporting and business intelligence, BI, queries, not operational event processing or low-latency message distribution. D is incorrect. Extract, Transform, Load, ETL, tools are typically used for scheduled batch data integration and bulk data movement between databases, which introduces latency and rigid dependencies unsuitable for near real-time event-driven messaging. Q24. What is true about the network connections when a Mule application uses a JMS connector to interact with a JMS provider message broker? A. To complete sending a JMS message, the JMS connector must establish a network connection with the JMS message recipient. B. To receive messages into the Mule application, the JMS provider initiates a network connection to the JMS connector and pushes messages along this connection. C. The JMS connector supports both sending and receiving of JMS messages over the protocol determined by the JMS provider. D. The EMQP protocol can be used by the JMS connector to portably establish connections to various types of JMS providers. The correct answer is C. The JMS connector supports both sending and receiving of JMS messages over the protocol determined by the JMS provider. Explanation why C is correct. The JMS Java Message Service connector is an abstraction layer provided by MuleSoft that implements the standard Java JMS API. It delegates a low-level wire protocol, such as OpenWire, EMQP, TCP, or HTTPS, to the underlying client library provided by the specific JMS broker, e.g., ActiveMQ, Solace, or IBM-MQ. The connector establishes connections to the broker to perform both outbound, sending/publishing, and inbound, receiving/consuming, messaging operations over that provider's native protocol. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. The JMS connector never connects directly to the final recipient. In a decoupled messaging architecture, the sender connects exclusively to the central JMS message broker, which buffers and routes the message to subscribers. B is incorrect. The Mule application, via the JMS connector client, always initiates the outbound TCP socket connection to the JMS provider. Even when receiving messages via listener, the connection is established client to broker, over which the broker delivers messages. D is incorrect. Standard JMS is an API specification for Java, not a wire-level protocol. While some modern brokers use AMQP under the hood, the standard Mule JMS connector relies on the vendor's JMS client libraries and protocol implementations, whereas AMQP is handled by a dedicated EMQP connector. Q25. A Mule application is running on a customer-hosted Mule runtime in an organization's network. The Mule application acts as a producer of asynchronous Mule events. Each Mule event must be broadcast to all interested external consumers outside the Mule application. The Mule event should be published in a way that is guaranteed in normal situations and also minimizes duplicate delivery in less frequent failure scenarios. The organizational firewall is configured to only allow outbound traffic on ports 80 and 443. Some external event consumers are within the organizational network, while others are located outside the firewall. What Anypoint platform service is most idiomatic, used for its intended purpose, for publishing these Mule events to all external consumers while addressing the desired reliability goals? A. CloudHub VM queues. B. Anypoint MQ. C. Anypoint Exchange. D. CloudHub Shared Load Balancer. The correct answer is B. Anypoint MQ. Explanation why B is correct. Anypoint MQ is MuleSoft's fully managed multi-tenant cloud messaging service. It communicates securely over standard HTTP/HTTPS ports, 80 and 443, allowing on-premises runtimes behind strict firewalls to publish messages without needing additional firewall ports opened. It supports pub/sub architecture via Exchange and queue bindings, enabling a single Mule event to be broadcast to all interested internal and external consumers. Furthermore, Anypoint MQ provides at least once message delivery guarantees with explicit acknowledgments, ACK/NACK, ensuring reliable publishing while keeping duplicate deliveries to a minimum during rare failure scenarios. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. CloudHub VM queues are designed strictly for intra-application communication within a single CloudHub application or worker set. They cannot be accessed directly by external consumers or applications running on customer-hosted runtimes. C is incorrect. Anypoint Exchange is an asset repository and portal used during design time to publish, discover, and share APIs, connectors, and templates. It is not an event broker or runtime messaging engine. D is incorrect. The CloudHub Shared Load Balancer, SLB, routes incoming HTTP/HTTPS requests to applications deployed on CloudHub. It does not provide publish/subscribe event broadcasting or queuing capabilities. Q26. A rate limiting policy has been applied to a SOAP version 1.2 API published in CloudHub. The API implementation catches errors in the global error handler on error propagating the main flow for HTTP. Retry_exhausted with HTTP status set to 429 and any with the HTTP status set to 500. What is the expected HTTP status when the client exceeds the quota of the API calls? A. HTTP status 429 as defined in the HTTP retry exhausted error handler in the API. B. HTTP status 500 as defined in the any error handler in the API, since an API retry_exhausted will be generated. C. HTTP status 401 unauthorized for policy violation. D. HTTP status 400 from the rate limiting policy violation, since the call does not reach the backend. The correct answer is D. HTTP status 400 from the rate limiting policy violation, since the call does not reach the backend. Explanation: why D is correct. When API gateway policy, such as rate limiting or throttling, is violated, the request is intercepted and rejected at the gateway level before it ever reaches the backend flow or execution context of the Mule application. Furthermore, MuleSoft's rate limiting policy handles WSDL/SOAP APIs differently than standard REST APIs. For SOAP version 1.2 WSDL APIs, the policy specifically returns HTTP status 400 when a quota is exceeded, whereas REST APIs return HTTP 429 and SOAP version 1.1 APIs return HTTP 500. Because the request never reaches the application flow, the backend global error handler is never triggered. Why other options are incorrect. A is incorrect. The API's internal error handler, HTTP, retry_exhausted, is only executed if an error occurs within the flow during processing. Because the policy blocks a request at the gateway layer before entering the flow, this error handler is bypassed completely. B is incorrect. The request never reaches a flow to trigger the any error handler. Additionally, policy quota violations do not generate API. Retry_exhausted errors inside the application runtime. C is incorrect. HTTP 401 unauthorized indicates a failure of authentication credentials, such as an invalid token or missing client ID/secret, whereas quota and rate limit violations return 400 for SOAP version 1.2 or 429 for REST. Q27. Which Salesforce API is invoked to deploy, retrieve, create, or delete customization information, such as custom object definitions, using a Mule Salesforce connector in a Mule application? A. Metadata API. B. REST API. C. SOAP API. D. Bulk API. The correct answer is A. Metadata API. Explanation why A is correct. The Salesforce Metadata API is specifically designed to manage structural and administrative customizations in a Salesforce org. It allows developers and integration applications to deploy, retrieve, create, update, or delete setup metadata, such as custom object definitions, custom fields, page layouts, and security settings, programmatically via the MuleSoft Salesforce connector. Why other options are incorrect? B is incorrect. The Salesforce REST API is primarily used to query, insert, update, or delete standard and custom data records, such as accounts or contacts, not for altering structural metadata or custom object definitions. C is incorrect. While the Salesforce SOAP API supports standard data record operations and basic administrative tasks, structural schema changes and custom object deployment are managed through the dedicated metadata API. D is incorrect. The Salesforce Bulk API is optimized for asynchronously loading, updating, or deleting large sets of data records, hundreds of thousands or millions of records, in batches, rather than managing org schema and customization definitions. Q28. A gaming company has implemented an API as a Mule application and deployed the API implementation to a CloudHub 2.0 private space. The API implementation must connect to a mainframe application running in the customer's on-premises corporate data center and also to a Kafka cluster running in an Amazon AWS VPC. What is the most efficient way to enable the API to securely connect from its private space to the mainframe application and Kafka cluster? A. In Runtime Manager, set up VPC peering between the CloudHub 2.0 private network and the on-premises data center. In the AWS account, set up VPC peering between the AWS VPC and the CloudHub 2.0 private network. B. In the AWS account, attach the CloudHub 2.0 private space to an AWS transit gateway that routes from the CloudHub 2.0 private space to the on-premises data center. In Runtime Manager, configure an Anypoint VPN to route from the CloudHub 2.0 private space to the AWS VPC. C. In Runtime Manager, configure an Anypoint VPN to route from the CloudHub 2.0 private space to the on-premises data center. In the AWS account, attach the private. D. In the AWS account, attach the private space directly to the AWS VPC. In the AWS account, use an AWS transit gateway to route from the AWS VPC to the on-premises data center. The correct answer is C. In Runtime Manager, configure an Anypoint VPN to route from the CloudHub 2.0 private space to the on-premises data center. In the AWS account, attach the private space to an AWS transit gateway or configure VPC peering to route to the AWS VPC. Explanation why C is correct. CloudHub 2.0 private spaces run natively on AWS infrastructure under the hood. Connecting a CloudHub 2.0 private space to an on-premises data center requires an Anypoint VPN IPsec tunnel configured via Runtime Manager. Connecting the private space to an Amazon AWS VPC hosting the Kafka cluster is done natively in AWS via VPC peering or by attaching the private space to an AWS transit gateway. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. VPC peering cannot be used between CloudHub and an on-premises data center. VPC peering is strictly an AWS to AWS networking mechanism. Connecting to an on-premises data center requires an Anypoint VPN or AWS Direct Connect. B is incorrect. Anypoint VPN is built for connecting CloudHub to external/on-premises networks, not for connecting natively between two AWS VPCs, where VPC peering or transit gateway attachment is used. D is incorrect. You cannot attach a CloudHub private space directly to an AWS VPC without using VPC peering or transit gateway attachments, nor can you route on-premises traffic through an AWS VPC via CloudHub without established IPsec tunnels. Q19. According to MuleSoft's IT delivery and operating model, which approach can an organization adopt in order to reduce the frequency of IT project delivery failures? A. Decouple central IT projects from the innovation that happens within each line of business. B. Adopt an enterprise data model. C. Prevent technology sprawl by reducing production of API assets. D. Stop scope creep by centralizing requirements gathering. Q29. Which MuleSoft feature helps users to delegate their access without sharing sensitive credentials or giving full control of accounts to third parties? A. Secure Scheme. B. Client ID Enforcement Policy. C. Connected Apps. D. Certificates. The correct answer is C. Connected Apps. Explanation why C is correct. Connected apps and Anypoint platform leverage OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect protocols to allow external third-party applications, scripts, or microservices to access Anypoint platform resources on behalf of a user or system. This enables fine-grained delegated access control without requiring users to share their underlying account credentials, such as username and password, or granting unlimited admin rights. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. Secure Scheme refers to REML security scheme definitions, such as basic authentication or digest, used to describe API security in specifications, not a platform-level mechanism for delegating administrative platform access. B is incorrect. Client ID Enforcement Policy is an API gateway policy used to validate whether an incoming API call originates from an authorized client application by checking client ID in secret, but it does not delegate user account access to third parties in any point platform. D is incorrect. Digital certificates, X.509, are used for SSL/TLS encryption, mutual TLS/MTLS, and cryptographic identity verification, rather than delegating third-party user permissions across any point platform accounts. Q30. A Mule application uses an HTTP request operation to involve an external API. The external API follows the HTTP specification for proper status code usage. What is possible cause when a 3XX status code is returned to the HTTP request operation from the external API? A. The request was not accepted by the external API. B. The request was redirected to a different URL by the external API. C. The request was not received by the external API. D. The request was accepted by the external API. The correct answer is B. The request was redirected to a different URL by the external API. Explanation why B is correct. Under the standard HTTP specification, RFC 7231/RFC 9110, the 3XX class of status codes indicates redirection. When an HTTP request operation receives a 3XX status code, such as 301 move permanently, 302 found, or 307 temporary redirect, it means the target resource has been relocated and the client must take additional action, typically requesting a different URL, to complete the operation. Why other options are incorrect? A is incorrect. Requests that are rejected or not accepted by an API return 4XX, client error. Status codes, e.g., 400 bad request, 401 unauthorized, 403 forbidden. C is incorrect. If the request was not received by the external API, a network/connection timeout error or connection refuse exception occurs at the transport layer, rather than receiving an HTTP status response from the server. D is incorrect. Requests that are successfully accepted and processed return 2XX success, status codes, e.g., 200 OK, 201 created, 202 accepted.
If this video helped clear up these MuleSoft concepts for you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps support the content. But don't go anywhere just yet. Stick around and jump straight into the next video to keep building your integration skills.